We quickly pulled Desmond into the room, his screams of pain echoing down the hall and causing my ears to ring. Once on the inside, Peter used his keycard to shut the door, typing in a code on the scanner to activate the room's locking mechanism. I glanced around the room, seeing that we had ended up in a large supply room. I quickly looked through the items at our disposal, searching for anything that could help Desmond's injuries. "What the hell was that, Peter?" Marcus said, kneeling by Desmond. I don't know," Peter murmured under his breath. We could hear the horde outside, slapping their bodies against the door. Was that the crew? Marcus's voice shook. "I don't know, Marcus," Peter shouted as he hovered his hands over Desmond's mutilated body. "Some of these holes got through the rib cage. We need something to stop the bleeding." Desmond had stopped screaming by now. Perhaps he had gone into shock. I found a small first aid kit and began running to Desmond's side. Looking back, I should have known it wouldn't do much to help. His wounds were too extensive, but holding that little white box filled me with so much hope. I froze when I reached his side, his glossed-over eyes and pale skin staring at me. Desmond was already dead. Before any of us could say a word, a new sound emanated from the door. A low buzzer sound followed by the metallic clicking of the locking mechanism. We slowly rose to our feet, a cold chill running down my spine as I recognized the sound. "Oh my God," Peter whispered. "They're trying codes. They aren't getting it right." Marcus turned to Peter. "Maybe they don't know the override code." "We aren't sticking around to find out," Peter announced. "Get the pry bar out of your toolkit." Peter took the tool from Marcus and went to the opposite side of the room. He pushed the contents off the shelves in order to climb up to the large air vent. While he worked, I looked around the storage room for anything I might use as a weapon, eventually finding a small tool bag that contained an average-sized pocket knife. It wouldn't do much, but it was something. Using the pry bar, Peter popped of the opening to the ventilation shaft before calling us over. We filed into the ventilation shaft. It was cool, cramped, and dark in the vents. The floor and walls creaked and squealed as we shimmy through them. "Where are we going?" Marcus asked. Peter looked down at his wrist monitor and scrolled along. "The map of the ship. There might be an air vent near the airlock." Peter replied, "We can shimmy back and get into our ship. We'll call command and let them deal with this." The trek back went by quickly. Adrenaline was still pumping through us all. As we moved along the vent, I heard the distinct sound of the generator kicking on. The ship's electrical power appeared to have been restored. We could see light shining through slats up ahead that Peter pointed out as the vent near the airlock. Once we reached the exit vent, Peter froze as he looked through the slats of the vent. "Shit," he whispered. I looked through the slats to see a mass of infected humans huddled around the airlock entrance, their bodies riddled with the pulsing holes of the ones before. "Why the fuck are they here?" Marcus asked quietly. "They must have known we'd come back," Peter whispered, his brow furrowed as he watched them. Without warning, Peter drew back his fist and punched the side of the ventilation shaft. The loud bang caused Marcus and I to jump in fear. "What the hell are you doing?" Marcus whispered. "Look," Peter said plainly, pointing at the slats. We looked out to see that the infected hadn't moved, hadn't reacted at all to the sudden loud noise. "These vents make a lot of noise as we travel through the," Peter explained, his eyes narrowing. "They would have heard us a while ago." "Why didn't they react?" Marcus asked. "The one we faced down the hall," Peter replied, his voice no longer concealed in whispers. "It didn't react to us until the light flashed over its shoulder, until there was a visual stimulus. I think they're deaf." "Then how do you explain the horde coming down the hall once we started screaming?" Marcus retorted. "Maybe they weren't attracted by the sound. Maybe they have a way of communicating without talking." Peter's finger slowly moved down the slats, pointing to the single large tendrils that extended out of each person and traveled down the hall in the same direction. "Well, if you're right," Marcus continued, "how does that help us?" Don't know yet, Peter answered, looking at his wrist monitor, but we aren't getting to the ship now. We need to make our way to the Rosen's command center. We'll get communication back online and have Earth send help. Maybe we'll find someone who can give us some answers. We began working our way towards the command entrance of the ship. I could feel the shock of the situation wearing off, and a horrible dread setting in. I didn't want to go further into the ship. I doubt any of us did, but what choice did we have? We passed alongside one of the cramped engine rooms. I looked through the slats of the vent to see multiple infected people huddled in the room. Their grotesque bodies moved erratically against the machinery. Some seemed to be holding tools while others had their hands slapped onto monitors, their fingers snapping awkwardly as they appeared to type. "What are they doing?" Marcus asked. We sat in silence for a long moment, observing them. Before Peter's shaky voice piped up, "They're trying to repair the ship." My eyes widened as I finally noticed what Peter had. It was rudimentary and wrong, like a child mimicking a mechanic, but he was right. They were trying to do maintenance. "How is that possible?" Marcus asked. "How do they know to do that?" "Maybe they maintain some kind of memory," Peter answered. "They could be acting out repetitive actions. Same with trying the codes on the door. Muscle memory." "Why would they want to get the ship's engines running?" Marcus questioned. "Where the hell do they plan to go?" "I don't know. Maybe." Peter stopped himself. I looked over at Peter. I could see his hands shaking. He was a team leader and was doing everything to maintain his composure, but I could see it on his face. He was terrified. "We need to make contact with command as soon as possible," Peter whispered. "Let's go." We continued down the path. I followed Peter's orders as he told me where to go at each fork. In the vents. The map system on Peter's wrist monitor didn't show the ventilation tracks, but it allowed us a basic sense of direction when compared to the hallways and rooms we moved alongside. After a while, I could feel fatigue setting in. Crawling through the vents on my hands and knees was taking a toll on my body. As we moved, the vents suddenly felt flimsy underneath me. Each movement was met with the metal plates flexing and buckling under our weight. A loud banging and creaking sound was let out with each advancement. We passed by a large set of slats that gave a great view of the outside area. I felt like my heart stopped as I looked out. We were suspended over a large mess hall. The chairs and tables had all been pushed out to the side, leaving the center of the room spacious and bare. There were many infected people in this room. They stood almost motionless, only giving a slight sway to each side. They stood around a large object that was fastened in the center of the room. The thing in that room was a mass of horrible ruin. A large, viscous blob with large root-like extremities, holding it to the floor. Its surface was a mix of deep red muscles, protruding bone, and hairy skin. Like the infected crew, the mass was covered in pulsing holes. Parts of the skin would expand and contract rhythmically, as though the mass was breathing. Off each root-like structure sprouted hundreds of long red tendrils. Most were small and slowly writhed along the ground, but others were long, stretching out of the room completely. I looked at the people standing around the room. I could see a tendril attached to each of them. It extended out of their body and connected them to the mass. Before any of us could say a word, we heard footsteps approaching from underneath us. We looked down to see two more infected people walking into the room. I heard Peter's breath hitch as we saw them dragging Desmond's lifeless body into the room. Pulling him by his arms, the two infected held up his body before the mass. He had been stripped naked, and his injuries looked much more severe, appearing as though he had been mostly hollowed out. The smaller tendrils around the mass stood up and wiggled in the air, as though they were being puppeted by a sick ventriloquist. We watched in horror as the tendrils grew in size and stretched out towards Desmond's body, slithering into the holes. I felt sick as Desmond's skin proceeded to deform and gyrate, like a blister stuffed with worms. The tendrils began breaking off of the mass and fully entering Desmond's body. Our coworker's corpse suddenly lurched back, his back bent to a point of almost breaking. His arms and legs erratically waved around, almost as though it was testing the body's limits. I watched as a thicker tendril snaked its way out of Desmond's leg and crawled along the floor before finally reuniting with the mass in the center of the room. Desmond's body then turned and shambled underneath us, back in the direction he came. We sat there in the vent, slack-jawed and pale. Some say there are things humans weren't meant to see. I didn't believe them until that moment. "I'll let go," Peter said before tapping my leg and pointing me forward. I continued down the vent until the path made a sharp left turn. As I went around the corner, I stopped as I faced a tall metal wall. The ventilation shaft extended upward about 8 feet before continuing. I placed my back against the wall and began to pant. Peter shuffled up to where I was and looked up the shaft. "Fuck," he whispered. "What now?" Marcus asked. "Do you think there is another way, if we funnel back?" "Probably not," Peter answered, while looking at his wrist monitor. "There's a small staircase up ahead that leads to the control room. The vents have to move up a level to reach it. We've got to get up there." "All right," Marcus replied. "What's the game plan?" "I'll lift you up," Peter said as he looked at me. "You're the smallest of the three of us, so you'll go up first. After you're up, Marcus will lift me next. After I'm up top, I'll help pull Marcus." Marcus and I shared a glance. The metal floor beneath us creaked and groaned at every move. Could it really hold all that weight? Before we could protest, Peter's words snapped our attention. "We don't have time to wait. Stand up. Let's get this over with." I stood and looked up at the ledge. It looked so far away in that moment. Peter grabbed me around the legs and lifted me. The metal creaked loudly, and I threw my arms over the ledge. I expected to feel my weight give out from under me at any moment, that I would crash down on the violent mess below us. I held my breath and kicked up Peter's body as I pulled myself up to safety. I turned back and looked over the edge, giving a shaky thumbs up. Peter sighed and closed his eyes for a moment. "All right, Marcus, lift me up." Marcus stood up in the shaft and looked up at the ledge where I was. He sighed before bending down and grabbing Peter by the legs. I scooted back and stared at the ledge. After a few moments, I began to see Peter rise above the ledge, his arms grabbing at the rim. I smiled at Peter for a moment, before a loud metallic pop caused me to jump. Peter's eyes widened, and I watched his form suddenly drop below the ledge with a large crash. I could hear Peter groaning as all I could see were his hands gripping the ledge. I crawled over and grabbed his wrists, looking over the edge to see that the vent panel had collapsed under the weight of Peter and Marcus. Marcus lay on the ground, calling out in pain. I adjusted my grip on Peter's arms and tried pulling him up. I then saw infected swarm over Marcus, his pained screams echoing through the metal vents. I pulled up on Peter as hard as I could, but I couldn't lift him on my own. "Take the keycard," Peter yelled, his face grimacing in fear. I hesitated for a moment. "Damn it, take it," he ordered. I quickly released his arms and lifted the keycard off his neck. The wrist monitor took. He groaned, sweat beading on his head. I reached down and unbuckled the monitor from his arm. "Get to the command deck. Send help. Don't look back. I'll try getting away." I nodded my head and turned back, scrambling quickly down the vent. I heard the metal hum as Peter released his grip, followed by a loud thud. I crawled as fast as I could, even as the sounds of Peter's screams filled the vent. I followed the map the best I could, winding back and forth through the ship. As I drew closer to the command center, the more my fear grew. Despite its crampedness, I wasn't in danger. What happens if I reach the command room and it's filled with infected? I couldn't go back. I would be out of options. As I began the final stretch to the control room, the vent began to shrink tighter. I had to lie on my stomach and shimmy along the tight corridor, the light coming from the slats being my only guidance forward. As I reached the slats, I let out a shaky sigh of relief. There was only one infected person in the room. It faced away from me, looking out the front window of the Rosen, as though it were looking out towards Earth. I pulled out the pocket knife and shimmied it between the vent and the wall. Using it as a makeshift pry bar, I loosened the grate enough to force it off the wall with a hard shove. Even with the knowledge that the infected couldn't hear, I still shuddered as the grate clattered against the floor behind the hole-ridden man. I slid out of the vent and landed on my hands and knees. I stood to my feet, my back aching from the constant crawling, and walked over to the command room entrance. I looked down the hall to see it completely empty. It was just me and the one crewmate, and I had the element of surprise. Without warning, the ship suddenly rattled and shook, and many of the monitors suddenly beeped and blinked. I was confused for a moment before the realization dawned on me. It was the feeling of the engines coming to life. I looked down to see the long tendril, trailing from the crewmate's leg back towards the mass in the mess hall. The infected in the room seemed to notice the sudden shake as well. I watched as the man slowly turned away from the window to face me, his eyes lighting up when he saw me. Seizing the moment, I reached down and grabbed the tendril, sliding my pocket knife underneath it and slicing the tendril in two. Immediately, the crewmate in the room began to convulse and thrash about in a confused manner. I ran up to the infected man, bringing my leg up and planting my foot hard into his hole-ridden chest. The man toppled back and landed on his back. He thrashed about in a feeble attempt to get up. Before he could get his bearings, I brought the heel of my foot down on the man's shins repeatedly, continuing until I heard the bones in each leg snap. Once I was sure the man was incapacitated, I ran to the communication monitor and began scrolling through to reach command on Earth. As I began work on establishing a connection, my eyes locked onto an anomaly on the monitor. The date was wrong. The date on the monitor read 2 weeks from that moment. Was it a bug? Some sort of electrical malfunction when the ship went through the wormhole? Then I saw the logs. Multiple entries, repair reports, and ration orders set over the 2 weeks that hadn't happened yet. The second to last report was a captain's order, detailing that the Rosen would be landing on the surface to allow the engines to cool. This made no sense to me at the time. The Rosen was designed to travel long periods through space. For the engines to overheat would require a long-running flight in an atmosphere. On top of that, what surface is the captain referring to that the ship was supposed to land on? The ship had been in outer space for the past 5 months. I opened the final log, a crew maintenance report. As my eyes scanned the document, a cold chill like deep space itself ran over me. I have sabotaged the engines. I don't have much time. They are testing codes on the door. It will repair the engines eventually, but it will take them time. At the very least, it might buy enough time for someone else to figure out a way to stop it. If you are reading this, it knows about Earth. It longs for it. If it reaches our planet, it will spread. You see what it has done to us. We cannot let it get to our home. I pray this final act is not in vain. I love you, Samantha. I'm sorry I can't be there for you and Jack. My breath was shaky. I could feel beads of sweat forming on my face. The thing was repairing the ship so it could get to Earth. As I stared, dumbfounded at the monitor, I suddenly heard footsteps approaching from behind. A large horde of the infected crew was shambling down the hall towards the command room, their corpse-like eyes locked onto me. At the front of the horde shambled Peter and Marcus, their broken bodies a sick mockery of the men I once knew. I ran to the hangar door and quickly swiped the keycard and input the emergency code on the door monitor, shutting the large door and sending the command room into lockdown protocol. I could hear them banging on the door as I ran to the navigation module. I didn't have time to call for help. Once they were in this room, it wouldn't take them long until they steered the ship straight into Earth. They might just burn up in the atmosphere or land somewhere deep in the ocean, but I could stake the world on that chance. I opened the navigation module, pulling up a small depiction of our solar system in real time. I found the coordinates and hastily plugged them. into the wormhole navigation system. The monitor on the door began to beep. They were testing codes now. The ship rattled, and I heard the wormhole generator hum to life. I looked out the window, a small blue rock in a near-infinite universe. It was my home. I felt fear and grief roll over me as I realized I would never see it again. Suddenly, Earth was gone, as was space. The ship now hovered about a mile over a surface of beautiful chaos, a plain that appeared to stretch out infinitely in all directions, a land that shifted in constant, unrecognizable patterns. It is made up of colors that are both familiar and indescribable. In the mess, I could see forests, mountains, and oceans, all made up of alien features, land masses folding in on themselves and becoming something entirely new. Beyond it all was a face, the visage of this world, this universe. It isn't something easily describable. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it so strongly that I might as well have been looking into its eyes. A being that both existed in this world and was, at the same time, the world in its entirety. The being was so beautiful, but it caused my eyes to burn. They bled, and I had to look away from it. This was where they were, the folded space between our own. I crouched down and hid myself from the gaze of the world. The banging on the door has stopped. I suppose it realized I had taken it back to its home. It knows it lost. There is no point in hunting me now, I believe. It has been about a day since I entered this folded space. That's what the date on the monitor says, at least. It feels as though it has been longer. I figured I would try sending my story through the command message system. I doubt the message will send, and even if it does, I have no way of knowing where or when it might appear. Time doesn't seem to make any sense in this place. Hopefully, someone will read this and put an end to the Rosen travel project. I have kept myself locked in the command room. I don't know why. It isn't like I'll find a way to make it out of this ship alive. I sealed my fate when I put in those coordinates. I might be better off feeding myself to that thing in the mess hall. I don't know how long it will take for the wormhole to spit us out the other end, but part of me wants to try and stay alive long enough to see the end. To be there when the thing realizes there's no escape for it. To watch its surprise as it withers away in searing pain as the metal it's attached to melts against its putrid flesh. When the Rosen reaches its final destination, the surface of the sun,